Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help. And King of Floors, your vinyl, laminate, and engineered flooring superstore.
Thomas Drance, he used to work with the Florida Panthers in that capacity.
That's
He
right.
joins us now. Thomas, of course, writes, senior writer for The Athletic, covers the Canucks, also a co-host of the Vancast podcast. Thomas, thanks so much for doing this on this deadline day. I know you're busy. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, gentlemen. And, of course, I remember well tracking down guys like Thomas Vanek and hosting press conferences or teleconferences back before Zoom on deadline day. Always a lot of fun. Always made sure to get my nails into them first to make sure no enterprising beat writers or television programs got them. Although in Florida, there wasn't a ton of demand for that, to be totally honest with you, gentlemen. I had a much easier time of it than the likes of the Blackhawks and the Canucks.
Yeah, you're not in hockey crazy Canada, Thomas.
No.
That's why.
Yeah. Hey, Thomas.
No, I'm not.
Your opinion, and it's Adam Gaudette to Chicago for Matthew Highmore. He comes to Vancouver. Your opinion of what the Canucks were up to today? Or
well, we'll see if they're done. I was trying to hunt down confirmation that they'd settled right before I got on the line and couldn't get it. So we'll have to keep our eyes on the Canucks and see if they snuck one in under the wire. We all know that trade calls get backed up on trade deadline day. But if you file the central registry that you've agreed to a deal, it's considered done, even if it takes some time to, in fact, come around. So keep your eye on the Canucks. I mean, the deadline may have passed 3 minutes ago, but I don't necessarily know at this point that they're done their business for today. Based on what we've seen so far, however, the Gaudette trade, first of all, I find it impossible, regardless of what's said officially, to divorce this deal from what's occurred here over the past 2 weeks and the fact that Adam Gaudette's widely presumed to be the index case for this COVID outbreak. I do think that has to have played a role here, although I'm sure it's not the sole reason for this deal. With Gaudette this offseason, for example, first of all, I think he had real trade value around the league. I think you could have got a pretty interesting piece for him on the trade market, certainly a more valuable piece than the likes of a Matthew Highmore, who I have time for. But the club did only do a one-year deal. I don't ever suspect that they had significant talks about going 3 years or using his 10.2C status to go longer term. I don't think that the club was necessarily super invested in Gaudette being a big part of this club's future. And considering his two-way play and how that's come along and some of the issues in terms of his first step, in terms of protecting the puck, you can understand, why the club was willing to make this deal, was willing to acquire a player like Highmore, who hasn't established himself as an everyday player in the Blackhawks lineup, but played well in the playoffs for them. I saw him a lot in the bubble. The work rate's there, the speed is there, and most importantly, the affordable one-way deal for next season with a $725K cap hit is there. And that's going to be more affordable than what you would have had to pay Gaudette even after his down season, as he becomes a true RFA for the first time this summer. So, you can understand what they were doing, but it's impossible to divorce this from the last 2 weeks, and it's impossible to shake the feeling that this is, the Canucks selling at the low ebb of a player's value.
Thomas, you just said you have time for Matthew Highmore. Explain.
Well, I like Highmore because he's pretty much established as what he is. Like, this is an energy bottom six forward. I don't think he's ever going to get to a top nine role, but I think he's an NHL fourth liner. I think he can play an everyday role for this Canucks team. He hasn't played a ton on the penalty kill for the Blackhawks, but I think he's got that in his toolkit in terms of the, defensive impact, in terms of the speed, in terms of the work rate. I like all those elements to his game. And again, I've seen him play 10 times live, but they were probably 10 of the best games of his career as he played in the bubble last summer and played really well. I saw enough there that I can understand why Canucks pro scouts sort of identified him as a player they were interested in seeing. They certainly did, right? This was a guy that the Canucks believe can fill a role for their club next season and down the stretch here. Even if, because of the 7-day quarantine, he won't be available for the club's next scheduled couple of games anyway. Nonetheless, they believe that this guy has more to offer. And I can at least see what they're getting at, even if the track record at the NHL level has to this point sort of never indicated that that's sort of what you're doing in making this trade in the first place, right? It's essentially a change of scenery deal.
Yeah.
Highmore should get more opportunity in Vancouver than he would have got in Chicago, and clearly Gaudette needed a fresh start. And Gaudette's got more upside, right? Gaudette's got the better offensive game, but I think Highmore is more reliable in his own end at this point. We all know how much the Canucks value that, especially among their bottom six forwards. So I can see what they're getting at. I think Highmore's an intriguing, low-cost bottom six depth piece who's locked up for next season. I like those elements of the deal anyway.
Hey, Thomas, you mentioned that you have a hard time separating this deal with Gaudette's COVID situation. Is there a part of this, any part of this at all, and Rick and I have been talking about this all morning, any part of this at all that is some sort of punishment for Gaudette?
No, I don't think it's punishment so much as, I do think, like it's deeply personal, right? Like it's deeply personal, and, I can understand how that made things complicated. And, I want to choose my words carefully here, because I don't think this was about, the outbreak or the fact that Gaudette was the index case, but it's impossible to separate, that, even if it's just from an optics standpoint, right? The club's doctor said, COVID is the culprit, but to have Gaudette dealt before the club practices again, right? For his last practice to have been a practice in which he left the ice following a positive case. I mean, it's impossible to look at this deal in complete isolation of those events.
Hey, Thomas, Ben Hutton just went to the Maple Leafs for a fifth-round pick.
Wow.
And this is what I mean. Like, Ben Hutton is getting a fifth-round pick, and this is why, Canuck fans get a little bit upset, Thomas. Like, you couldn't get a draft pick for Adam Gaudette? Nothing? And Ben Hutton got a fifth-rounder?
Yeah, I mean, I understand the frustration. Teams ran out of options pretty quickly here, right? And that's why you see Hutton for a fifth to the Maple Leafs. The Maple Leafs having lost out on the likes of Kulikov earlier on in the day, even Gustafsson, I'm sure. So, teams run out of options, and surprisingly, we actually saw a bit of a favorable seller's market. I mean, you look at Treliving, Jarmo Kekalainen, there's a ton of GMs, Doug Wilson, Steve Yzerman, there's a ton of GMs who did really well for themselves at the deadline. I can understand why Canucks fans would be frustrated by the lack of activity on the club's end to this point, although I would caution that to this point, I don't have confirmation that the club is done, so we'll see. I'm certainly surprised that a team like Winnipeg hasn't added a defender. I'm curious to see if there's, another shoe to drop here, and I think we maybe want to let that lapse. I don't want to go and be blasting the Canucks for having failed to monetize an asset, and 20 minutes later it breaks that they have.
Yeah.
So, being a little bit circumspect, I can understand why Canucks fans are a little bit frustrated when you see Bennett go, but Virtanen stay, for example. And Bennett go for a haul, right? A second and a prospect.
Thomas,
I can understand.
Thomas, I'm hearing that possibly a Canucks defenseman on the move here. I'm just I haven't got this confirmed, but
Jordy Ben?
Well, it's if you're talking about Jordy Ben, and we're past 12 o'clock here, but I just been and this isn't confirmed again. Just there's a rumor out there that it could be possibly a defenseman on the move here in the next few minutes by the Canucks.
Let me ask this. Sorry, Rick, but let me ask this to Thomas. You mentioned Winnipeg looking for a defender. Does Ben to the Jets make sense?
I mean, I think that would make sense. I think it's clear that Winnipeg needs to add some defensive depth when you look at that lineup at the moment. But yeah, I mean, again, I would expect to have been able to confirm if the Canucks were done, right? I wouldn't expect to be able to confirm if they were not, because that would essentially be someone giving me a trade. You tend to have to work a little harder for that, as Rick will tell you. But yeah, so the fact that I can't get confirmation that something's done, I'm not surprised. I will not be surprised if there's a deal in the, queue, as it's called, with the Canucks that maybe they snuck in under the wire. I assume we'll learn more here. But yeah, Hutton for a fifth, by the way. I like that for the Ducks. That's a good bit of business. And we saw a lot of that too with especially the Chicago Blackhawks. When you look at the Janmark return they got 2 picks for a guy they signed 3 days after the market opened, which also I think speaks to another factor that we can't divorce from the deadline, which is the Tanner Pearson extension and the opportunity cost you incur by extending him as opposed to flipping him, especially when we then see, first rounders, second rounders, a second and a third rounder go for a bunch of left wingers. I think Pearson would have been strongly in the middle of that group in terms of his market value, certainly ahead of Janmark, potentially even ahead of Taylor Hall. So, there's those sorts of considerations too. And then when you consider the $3 million in cap space that takes up and the fact that prevents you then in this offseason from taking a bet on a guy like Hutton or a guy like Janmark who can be flipped and sort of replenish the stockpile that way. I do understand why Canucks fans would look at this and be a little bit frustrated by the club's overall activity.
And good Nashville, Branson to Nashville for a seventh rounder.
Moments after Hutton got traded.
So Ben Hutton, a fifth. It just adds to the frustration why you can't get a draft pick. But you know what it is, Thomas?
And we'll see, right? We might be wrong in 10 minutes, right? The Canucks may have gotten a draft pick here. We'll see as the dust settles in the moments ahead.
If it's Jordy Ben moving here in the next, and we don't know, but I've been tipped off it could be a defenseman. If it's Jordy Ben, you got to get a pick, Thomas. You got to get a pick back. You got to. Mm-hmm.
No question.
If Hutton and Branson are getting picks, Jordy Ben, you got to get something in return.
Well, and I think what I was hearing earlier in the day was that the ask, on Ben was similar to what the Maple Leafs paid for Hutton. So, sort of in and around there. Although we have seen with Gustafsson and Goodbranson, two names that are, confusingly similar. I'm surprised, Rick, that you haven't struggled with it.
With what?
He's struggling with it right now. He didn't hear what you said.
I was texting. Who are you talking about, Thomas?
Anyway, with you have seen those guys go for seventh, though, which suggests that, after buyers seem to have got a little bit desperate over the last 24 hours, maybe in the last 30 minutes, it's switched back to the sellers, just making sure they get something for some of their guys. Where it lands in the event that the Canucks have dealt a defenseman, as Rick is hearing, that'll be fascinating to see what that dynamic and what that potential return looks like.
Yeah, we'll see if it's true.
Okay,
it's just a rumor out there.
So again, Goodbranson goes to Nashville, Ben Hutton to the Leafs, both deals involving later round draft picks the other way. Your old employers, the Panthers, have stocked up. The Islanders, Leafs, Bruins, Buffalo, and Columbus building for the future. Is there a team that has really impressed you over the last couple of days in terms of making deals before the deadline, Thomas?
Yeah, I like Toronto's body of work overall. I think when you look at the Leafs' position, right? They're in a division with Tampa Bay and Boston. Will anyone be really surprised if all three teams from that usual sort of Northeast Division, the Northeast Division in normal times, emerge in the Final Four, right? I don't think so, which speaks to the difficulty that the Leafs have under the current alignment. And, this year you're probably facing Montreal in the first round and then the winner of Edmonton and Winnipeg. And if you can get through those three teams, or the two of those three teams you play, you're 8 wins away from the Stanley Cup, where usually you'd be looking at having to beat both Boston and Tampa Bay. That's such a unique opportunity. And for a team with very little cap space, Anderson hits LTI. They trade for Riley Nash, who goes on LTI. That creates $7.75 million in cap space. They use that cap space to acquire Nick Foligno, to acquire David Riddick, which is the one deal I didn't love in that set, but nonetheless. And then you look at, adding Ben Hutton, which is just, obvious insurance, right? Just an additional body should, a player like Travis Dermott have to play up because of injury. Your third line doesn't take too big a hit. Your third pair doesn't take too big a hit. If you're running out Hutton and Bogosian for 10 minutes a game in the playoffs, I don't think you're sweating. Anyway, I like that body work. I think they basically bolstered every single position on their roster, right? Top six forward, bottom six forward, bottom pair defenseman, goalie. I think that was a clear-eyed assessment of the stakes, and to get all of that work done without touching your Sandins or your Amarovs or your Robertsons, like any of their top 5 prospects, I think that's really good work for a team that clearly recognizes a unique opportunity ahead of them.
Thomas, above and beyond on a very busy day. Thanks so much for this, sir.
My absolute pleasure, gentlemen. All the best.